The F-22 Raptor screamed through the Nevada sky at 38,000 feet when Captain Elena Vasquez felt the first shudder in her controls. Not the gentle vibration of turbulence or the familiar hum of the twin Pratt & Whitney engines. This was something else entirely. Something is wrong. The aircraft's fly-by-wire system, normally smooth as silk beneath her gloved hands, suddenly felt like wrestling a wild animal. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Ghost Rider Control. This is Falcon 7. Elena's voice cut through the static, her tone steady despite the growing alarm bells in her mind. I'm showing multiple system warnings. Requesting immediate vector to nearest airfield. The response crackled back through her helmet's comm system, distorted by distance and interference. Falcon 7, nearest viable runway is Nellis AFB, bearing 2-7-0, distance 140 nautical miles. Be advised, weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Elena's dark eyes swept across the instrument panel, taking in the cascade of warning lights that had begun illuminating like a malevolent Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Flight control surfaces respond sluggishly. The heads-up display flickered intermittently, ghosting in and out of focus. The irony wasn't lost on her, that she might now have to prove them wrong in the most dramatic way possible. Copy, Ghost Rider Control. Falcon 7 beginning descent and course correction. Elena pulled the stick back gently, feeling the aircraft respond with reluctant compliance. The Raptor, capable of supercruise at Mach 1.5 without afterburners, now felt as sluggish as a training aircraft on a bad day. Below her, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a tapestry of rust-colored mountains and flat expanses, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional dirt road. She'd flown this route dozens of times during training exercises, but never under circumstances like these. The landscape that had once seemed monotonous now appeared ominous, offering few options for emergency procedures. Elena's mind raced back to her training at the Air Force Academy, where her flight instructor, Colonel Marcus Hayes, had drilled emergency scenarios into her until they became second nature. The aircraft doesn't care how tall you are, Vasquez, he'd said during one particularly grueling session. Physics doesn't discriminate. But physics also doesn't account for heart, and you've got more of that than pilots twice your size. Colonel Hayes had been one of the few who'd believed in her from the beginning. Most others had seen her height as an insurmountable obstacle. Now, as she wrestled with a malfunctioning $30 million aircraft, her focus remained entirely on the emergency procedures. The second major system failure announced itself with a violent lurch to the left. Elena's harness cut into her shoulders as she fought to bring the aircraft back to level flight. The primary flight computer had just gone offline, leaving her with backup systems that were operating at maybe 60% capacity. She could feel the Raptor's stealth coating beginning to heat up abnormally, another warning sign that whatever was wrong went deeper than a simple electrical malfunction. Ghost Rider Control, Falcon 7. I've lost primary flight computer and experiencing severe control difficulties. Request emergency clearance for any available runway. The pause that followed seemed to stretch forever. When the controller's voice returned, it carried a gravity that made Elena's stomach clench. Falcon 7, be advised we're showing you approximately 80 miles from any suitable airfield. Current rate of descent indicates you may not maintain altitude long enough to reach Nellis. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing herself that single second of human vulnerability, before snapping back into pilot mode. She'd known this day might come eventually. Every fighter pilot did. The statistics were sobering. Even with the most advanced safety systems, the job carried inherent risks that no amount of training could entirely eliminate. But as she opened her eyes and scanned the horizon, something caught her attention. Far below, cutting through the desert like a thin black ribbon, was Highway 95, the same highway she'd driven countless times during her years stationed at Nellis. She knew that stretch of road. It was straight for miles, relatively flat, and most importantly, wide enough to accommodate an aircraft in an emergency. The idea that began forming in her mind was beyond unconventional. It was borderline insane. Landing a fighter jet on a public highway had been done before, but not with an F-22, and never with the kind of system failure she was experiencing. The Raptor was a beast of an aircraft, designed for air superiority missions, not improvised highway landings. Her radio crackled again. "Falcon 7, what's your status?" "We're not receiving telemetry from your aircraft." "Ghost Rider Control." "I'm evaluating all available options," Elena replied, her voice betraying none of the wild calculation happening in her mind. She was already running numbers, approach speeds, landing distances, wind conditions, the probability of civilian traffic on that particular stretch of highway at this time of day. Through her canopy, she could see storm clouds building on the horizon. The weather that had been reported as deteriorating was clearly worsening faster than predicted. Even if she could maintain altitude long enough to reach Nellis, landing in crosswinds with compromised flight controls would be a nightmare. Scenario. Elena thought of her younger sister Maria, a freshman at UCLA studying aerospace engineering, who had called just last week. "I tell everyone my big sister flies the most advanced fighter jet in the world," Maria had said, her voice bright with pride. "They think I'm making it up until I show them the pictures." She thought of her parents, who had immigrated from Guatemala. When she was 3 years old, working double shifts at a textile factory so she could attend better schools. Her father had never understood her obsession with flying, but he'd supported her anyway, driving her to air shows and model airplane competitions throughout her childhood. She thought of the letter in her flight suit pocket, a rejection notice from NASA's astronaut candidate program. The third rejection in 5 years. Each time, the feedback had been variations on the same theme: exceptional piloting skills and technical knowledge, but concerns about physical requirements for long-duration spaceflight missions. Too short for space, apparently, just as she'd once been told she was too short for fighters. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, she had a decision to make that would define not just her career, but potentially her life. The altimeter showed 22,000 feet and falling. She had maybe 10 minutes to choose her course of action. Elena keyed her radio one more time. "Ghost Rider Control, Falcon 7. I need to know the current traffic situation on Highway 95, approximately 30 miles south of your location. I also need you to contact Nevada State Patrol and clear any civilian vehicles from that area immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. When the controller's voice returned, it was tight with disbelief. "Falcon 7, please confirm your intentions." "Ghost Rider Control, I'm going to attempt a highway landing. I need that road cleared now." As Elena began her descent toward the impossibly narrow ribbon of asphalt below, she caught her reflection in the canopy glass, a small woman in a massive machine, about to attempt something that would either make aviation history or become a cautionary tale told in flight schools for generations to come. The desert floor rushed up to meet her as she began the most critical approach of her life, leaving behind only questions that wouldn't be answered for several heart-stopping minutes to come. Elena adjusted her approach angle, feeling the Raptor respond sluggishly to her inputs. The backup flight systems were holding, but barely. She could see Highway 95 more clearly now, a straight stretch of two-lane blacktop that looked impossibly narrow from her current altitude of 18,000 feet. Cars moved along it like tiny beetles, oblivious to the drama unfolding above them. "Ghost Rider Control, I need confirmation that highway is being cleared." Elena transmitted, her voice remaining steady through years of training that had taught her to compartmentalize. Fear. Falcon 7, Nevada State Patrol is responding. ETA for road closure is approximately 8 minutes. Can you maintain current descent rate? Elena glanced at her altimeter. 15,000 feet. The mathematics were becoming clearer and more terrifying with each passing second. At her current rate of descent, she would reach highway level in roughly 6 minutes. That gave the State Patrol 2 minutes to clear what she estimated was at least a 5-mile stretch of road, assuming her calculations about landing distance were correct. The weight of the decision she'd just made settled fully on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. If she miscalculated, if the aircraft broke up on impact or skidded into traffic that hadn't been cleared, civilian lives would be lost. The responsibility was staggering, but the alternative, ejecting and letting a $30 million aircraft crash randomly into the desert or, worse, into populated areas, carried its own set of unacceptable risks. Elena's hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced efficiency, shutting down non-essential systems to conserve power and reduce fire risk. The Raptor's engines were still responding normally, which gave her some hope for controlling her approach speed. She would need to bring the aircraft in as slowly as possible while maintaining enough airspeed to keep from stalling. The radio crackled with new voices. Air traffic controllers from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas, military personnel from Nellis, and now what sounded like emergency services coordinators. Word was spreading quickly through the aviation community that something unprecedented was happening in the Nevada desert. Falcon 7, this is General Patricia Morrison, Nellis AFB. Captain Vasquez, I need to know your current assessment of aircraft condition and your confidence level in this approach. Elena recognized the voice. General Morrison was base commander at Nellis and one of the highest-ranking female officers in the Air Force. She'd seen Elena's service record and had been instrumental in her assignment to the elite 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron. General Morrison, I have partial flight control authority and engines are responding normally. Landing gear status is unknown until I attempt deployment. I assess this as our best option given current circumstances and remaining fuel. Copy that, Captain. Be advised we have emergency services en route to your projected landing area. You have full support for whatever you need. As Elena continued her descent, she found herself thinking about the day she'd first soloed in a T-6 Texan trainer at the Air Force Academy. Her instructor, Captain Jennifer Walsh, had been the first female pilot Elena had ever flown with. After the flight, Captain Walsh had pulled her aside. I know what they're saying about your height, Walsh had said. I heard the same things when I started flying. But I want you to remember something. The greatest pilots in history weren't great because of their physical attributes. They were great because they could think clearly under pressure and make decisions others couldn't make. Size is just a number. Heart and brains are what matter up there. Now at 12,000 feet and descending through scattered clouds, Elena drew strength from that memory. She could see individual vehicles on Highway 95 more clearly, and to her relief, there seemed to be fewer of them. The State Patrol was apparently making progress with the road closure. The desert landscape that had seemed hostile minutes earlier now took on different characteristics as Elena studied it with a pilot's eye for emergency landing sites. She identified the specific section of highway she would target, a stretch that appeared to run straight for at least 3 miles, with relatively flat terrain on both sides. If something went wrong during the landing roll, there would be some margin for error. Elena began running through her mental checklist for an unconventional landing. Flaps and landing gear would need to be deployed at the last possible moment to avoid additional stress on the compromised control systems. She would need to touch down as gently as possible while still maintaining enough control authority to keep the aircraft straight during rollout. The radio filled with chatter as more Agencies became involved in the emergency response. She heard references to media helicopters being cleared from the area, ambulances being positioned, and fire suppression equipment being moved into place. The scope of the operation was expanding rapidly, adding another layer of pressure to an already high-stakes situation. At 8,000 feet, Elena made her decision about landing configuration. Ghost Rider Control, Falcon 7 is beginning final approach preparation. I'll be deploying landing gear and flaps at 3,000 feet. Creating these detailed aviation stories requires extensive research and time. If you're enjoying Elena's incredible emergency landing, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss our latest aviation stories. Roger, Falcon 7. Highway is now closed to civilian traffic. Emergency vehicles are staged approximately 2 miles from your target landing zone. Elena took a deep breath and began the most critical phase of the approach. The Raptor responded to her control inputs, but she could feel the aircraft fighting her every decision. Whatever had caused the initial system failures was getting worse, not better. As she descended through 5,000 feet, Elena caught sight of something that made her heart rate spike: a small aircraft, apparently a news helicopter, hovering dangerously close to her approach path. Ghost Rider Control, I have unknown aircraft in my approach corridor. Need immediate clearance. The response was swift and sharp. All aircraft, this is Nellis Approach Control. You are ordered to clear the area immediately. This is an active emergency operation. The helicopter banked away, but the incident reminded Elena that she was no longer operating in the controlled environment of a military airfield. This was improvised aviation at its most dangerous, with variables she couldn't predict or control. 3,000 feet. Time for landing configuration. Elena reached for the landing gear handle, knowing that this moment would determine whether her plan was even feasible. If the gear failed to deploy properly, the entire approach would become an academic exercise. Mechanical sounds of the landing gear extending were muffled by her helmet, but the indicator lights told the story. All 3 gear showing green: main gear and nose gear, properly deployed and locked. For the first time since the emergency began, Elena felt a surge of genuine optimism. The morning had started like any other for Captain Elena Vasquez, with her alarm clock buzzing at 0500 hours in her small apartment just outside Nellis Air Force Base. Her routine was precise, almost ritualistic in its consistency, habit developed during her years at the Air Force Academy and refined through countless deployments. She rolled out of bed, her feet barely reaching the floor from the standard military-issue mattress that was too high for someone of her stature, and padded to the kitchenette in bare feet. Coffee first. Always coffee first. The machine was already programmed to begin brewing at 0459, filling her modest apartment with the rich aroma of Colombian beans, a small luxury she allowed herself. A connection to her family's heritage that felt important in a world where she often felt like an outsider. As she poured the dark liquid into her favorite mug, a ceramic piece her sister Maria had made in a college pottery class with "World's Tallest Pilot" in spirit, painted in uneven letters, Elena caught her reflection in the kitchen window. At 28 years old, she had reached the pinnacle of military aviation, qualified to fly the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Yet every morning began the same way, with a moment of looking at herself and remembering every person who had told her she didn't belong in a cockpit. The reflection showed a woman who had to stand on her tiptoes to reach the higher shelves in her kitchen cabinets, who needed a step stool to perform routine maintenance checks on her aircraft, who had been passed over for certain assignments because commanding officers worried about ergonomic compatibility issues. Elena's morning routine included 30 minutes of stretching and yoga, not for relaxation but for practical necessity. Flying a fighter aircraft placed tremendous physical demands on the human body, and her smaller frame had to work harder to handle the G-forces that taller, more muscular pilots might manage more easily. She had developed a precise sequence of exercises designed to strengthen her core and maintain the flexibility needed to reach all the cockpit controls efficiently. Her apartment reflected the careful organization of someone who had learned to maximize limited space. Everything had its place, from her flight suits hanging in exact order to her collection of aviation books, arranged by subject and publication date. The walls were decorated with photographs from her career graduation from the academy, her first solo flight, receiving her wings, the day she was certified on the F-22. Each image told the story of someone who had fought for every achievement, who had never been given anything easily. The framed letter on her desk was from her father, written in careful Spanish on lined notebook paper. He worked the night shift at a packaging plant in Los Angeles, and his English was still limited after 25 years in America. But his pride was evident in every carefully formed word. "Mia, your mother and I watch the planes fly over sometimes and wonder if one of them is you up there, protecting our country. We are proud of the woman you have become, even if we don't understand how you do what you do." Elena's relationship with her family was complicated by distance and circumstance. Her parents had sacrificed enormously to give her opportunities they had never had, working multiple jobs to afford the tutoring and activities that eventually led to her appointment to the Air Force Academy. But they couldn't quite comprehend the world their daughter now inhabited, a realm of classified missions, advanced technology, and dangers they preferred not to think about too deeply. Her sister Maria was different. 13 years younger. She had grown up watching Elena's journey with fascination and admiration. Maria's own path toward aerospace engineering was directly inspired by her sister's career, but it also represented a gentler alternative. "I want to design the planes," Maria had told her during their last phone conversation, "so you can keep flying them safely." The drive to Nellis each morning took Elena through Las Vegas suburbs that reminded her how far she had traveled from her childhood. In East LA, these weren't the neighborhoods where she had grown up, where aircraft noise was a distant rumble. And military service was often seen as a path out of limited options rather than a calling to excellence. Here, the houses were larger, the lawns greener, and the children who played in the yards would likely never face the choice between military service and economic uncertainty. Elena had chosen the Air Force not out of desperation, but out of fascination. Her earliest memory was of watching military jets practice overhead during an air show at Long Beach Airport when she was 6 years old. While other children focused on the noise and spectacle, she had been mesmerized by the precision of the formations. The way the aircraft seemed to dance through the sky with impossible grace and control. Her father had noticed her obsession and, despite his limited income, had scraped together money for model airplanes and flying lessons at a small airport near their home. Elena's instructor, an elderly man named Charlie Brennan, who had flown bombers in Vietnam, became the first person to tell her that size didn't matter in aviation. "The airplane doesn't know how tall you are," Charlie had said during one of their early lessons in a battered Cessna 152. "It only knows whether you understand what it's trying to tell you." Some of the best pilots I ever flew with could barely see over the instrument panel, but they could feel what the airplane needed better than anyone. Those words had sustained Elena through years of doubt and criticism. Even now, as she performed her pre-flight inspection each morning, she could hear Charlie's voice reminding her that flying was about communication between human and machine, not about meeting arbitrary physical standards. The pre-flight routine for an F-22 Raptor was extensive, involving dozens of systems checks and visual inspections. Elena had memorized every step years ago, but she never allowed herself to become complacent. Each inspection was performed with the same attention to detail as her first, because she knew that any oversight could prove catastrophic at 30,000 feet and Mach 2. Her crew chief, Technical Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, had initially been skeptical of Elena's abilities. Rodriguez had 20 years of experience maintaining fighter aircraft, and he made no secret of his belief that some pilots were simply too small to handle the physical demands of operating complex military systems. But over the course of 18 months working together, his attitude had gradually shifted. "Captain Vasquez is the most thorough pilot I've ever worked with," Rodriguez had told a visiting inspector just the previous month. "She knows every system on this aircraft better than some of the engineers who designed it. Size doesn't matter when you've got that kind of attention to detail." Elena's thoroughness was born of necessity, not natural inclination. She had learned early in her career that she couldn't afford the casual mistakes that other pilots might get away with. Every action had to be precise, every decision carefully considered, because she was constantly being evaluated, not just on her performance, but on her worthiness to be there at all. The other pilots in her squadron had slowly accepted her presence. But integration had been a gradual process marked by small victories and occasional setbacks. During her first week with the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, she had overheard two pilots discussing whether she would be able to handle the physical demands of air-to-air combat maneuvering. Rather than confronting them directly, Elena had requested additional training flights specifically focused on high-G scenarios, pushing herself to demonstrate capabilities that exceeded squadron standards. Flight training had always been Elena's sanctuary, the place where doubts and external pressures dissolved into the pure mechanics of aviation. In the cockpit of an F-22, surrounded by advanced avionics and systems that most people couldn't begin to comprehend, she felt completely at home. The aircraft responded to her inputs with precision and power, translating her intentions into motion through three-dimensional space with an elegance that never ceased to amaze her. But even her love of flying couldn't completely shield her from the broader frustrations of her career progression. The rejection letter from NASA's astronaut program had arrived just 2 weeks earlier, and Elena had read it multiple times, searching for explanations beyond the standardized language of bureaucratic disappointment. The selection board had praised her piloting skills, her advanced degrees in aerospace engineering and physics, her leadership experience and unblemished service record. But between the lines, she detected familiar concerns about physical requirements for long-duration space missions. Elena had dreamed of space travel since childhood, inspired by astronauts like Sally Ride and Mae Jemison, who had broken barriers in space exploration. Her academic achievements and flying experience should have made her a strong candidate for the astronaut corps, but she suspected that her height remained an unofficial but persistent obstacle. NASA's requirements had evolved over the years, but the bias toward taller candidates remained, embedded in selection processes and equipment design. The irony was bitter. She could handle the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, operate in environments that would incapacitate most people, and make split-second decisions with millions of dollars of equipment and potentially thousands of lives at stake. But she was apparently too short to be trusted with a ride to the International Space Station. Elena had shared her disappointment with only one person, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chun, a fellow pilot who had become both mentor and friend. Chun, one of the first Asian American women to fly the F-22, understood the particular challenges faced by female pilots who didn't fit the traditional image of military aviation. "I got turned down by NASA 3 times, Chun had told Elena over coffee, in the base commissary. "Each time, I told myself it was about qualifications or experience or timing. It took me years to admit that some barriers are real, even if they're never explicitly stated. But you know what? I found my purpose right here, doing exactly what we're doing. Sometimes the path that's blocked isn't the only path to where you're supposed to be." Elena respected Chun's perspective, but she couldn't entirely accept it. The rejection from NASA felt like a culmination of all the subtle and not-so-subtle messages she had received throughout her career, that excellence might not be enough, That some doors would remain closed regardless of her achievements. Her response had been characteristic. She threw herself even more deeply into her current assignment, volunteering for additional test flights and taking on complex evaluation projects that other pilots avoided. If she couldn't explore space, she would push the boundaries of atmospheric flight, contributing to the development of systems and procedures that would benefit military aviation for generations. The morning's mission briefing had been routine. High-altitude systems evaluation flight designed to test new software updates for the F-22's avionics package. Elena had flown similar profiles dozens of times, collecting data that engineers would analyze to improve aircraft performance and safety. It was important work, but it felt far removed from the dreams of exploration and discovery that had initially drawn her to aviation. As she had walked to her aircraft that morning, Elena had noticed storm clouds building on the horizon. Weather in Nevada could change rapidly, transforming clear skies into challenging flying conditions with little warning. She had made a mental note to monitor conditions carefully during her flight, but her primary focus was on the technical objectives of the mission. The pre-flight inspection had revealed nothing unusual, all systems functioning normally. Fuel load appropriate for the planned mission profile, weather conditions within acceptable parameters. Elena had strapped herself into the cockpit with the same methodical precision she applied to every flight, adjusting her seat and controls to accommodate her smaller frame, running through checklists that were second nature after thousands of hours in military aircraft. Takeoff had been routine, the Raptor accelerating down the runway with its characteristic surge of power, lifting off cleanly into the morning sky. Elena had marveled once again at the smoothness of the aircraft systems, the way complex technologies integrated seamlessly to create an experience of almost effortless flight. For the first hour aloft, everything had proceeded according to plan. She had climbed to altitude, conducted the prescribed test sequences, and collected data that would contribute to ongoing improvements in aircraft design and performance. It was exactly the kind of technical flying she excelled at, demanding precision and attention to detail while operating at the edge of technological capability. But even as she had focused on her assigned tasks, Elena's mind had wandered to larger questions about her future and purpose. The NASA rejection had forced her to reconsider her long-term goals and examine whether her current path was leading where she truly wanted to go. Military aviation offered many satisfactions, but it also came with limitations and frustrations that seemed to multiply rather than diminish with experience. Now, as warning lights began illuminating her instrument panel and control responses became erratic, all those philosophical considerations evaporated instantly. The abstract questions about career paths and future dreams were replaced by immediate, concrete challenges that would determine whether she survived the next few minutes. Elena's descent toward Highway 95 had drawn attention from across the southwestern United States as word of the emergency spread through aviation networks, social media, and news organizations. In the control tower at Nellis Air Force Base, a crowd of personnel had gathered around radar screens and communication consoles, watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of professional concern and personal investment. Colonel Marcus Hayes, Elena's former flight instructor, had been called in from his office to assist with the emergency coordination. Hayes, now deputy commander of the 57th Wing, had followed Elena's career closely since her academy days. He stood behind the primary air traffic controller, his weathered hands gripping the back of a chair as he watched the radar blip that represented both his former student and $30 million of advanced military hardware descending toward an improvised landing strip. "What's her current altitude and descent rate?" Hayes asked, his voice carrying the controlled tension of someone intimately familiar with aviation emergencies. 4,000 feet, descending at 800 feet per minute, the controller responded. "She's maintaining approach speed better than we expected given the system failures." Hayes nodded grimly. He had taught Elena the fundamentals of emergency procedures, but nothing in standard training covered landing a stealth fighter on a public highway. What she was attempting required a combination of technical skill, physical courage, and improvisational thinking that went far beyond normal pilot training. Meanwhile, on Interstate 95, Nevada State Patrol Sergeant Lisa Kowalski was coordinating the most unusual traffic closure of her 15-year career. From her position at a hastily established roadblock, she could see military helicopters circling in the distance and emergency vehicles racing toward the designated landing zone. The radio chatter from various agencies was constant and sometimes chaotic as multiple organizations tried to coordinate an unprecedented operation. All units, be advised the aircraft is approximately 3 minutes out from touchdown attempt, came the voice of the incident commander, a fire chief who was clearly struggling to adapt standard emergency protocols to circumstances no one had ever imagined. Sergeant Kowalski keyed her radio. Roadblock Alpha is secure. No civilian traffic is getting through, but we've got news vans trying to set up positions just outside our perimeter. How close is too close for media? The question hung in the air because no one really knew. Fighter. Aircraft weren't supposed to land on highways, so there were no established safety protocols for managing the associated risks. Emergency coordinators were improvising procedures in real time, making decisions based on limited information and worst-case scenario planning. At McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas, air traffic controllers were dealing with their own complications as news helicopters and private aircraft attempted to enter airspace that had been hastily designated as restricted. Civilian pilots, many of them drawn by curiosity and the prospect of witnessing aviation history, were overwhelming communication frequencies and creating additional hazards for an operation that was already pushing safety margins to their limits. On 47 Bravo Charlie, you are ordered to exit restricted airspace immediately, barked an increasingly frustrated controller. This is an active military emergency operation. Roger, McCarran approach, but can you confirm reports of an F-22 attempting highway landing? We represent Channel 8 News and are maintaining safe distance. Negative on information requests. Clear the area immediately, or we will contact Federal Aviation Administration for enforcement action. Similar conversations were taking place across multiple frequencies as the aviation community struggled to balance public interest with operational safety. Word of Elena's emergency had spread quickly through pilot networks and aviation enthusiasts, creating an audience for what might become either a remarkable demonstration of piloting skill or a catastrophic failure broadcast live across multiple platforms. In the Pentagon, senior Air Force leadership was receiving regular updates on the situation. The potential loss of an F-22 Raptor, one of only 187 ever built, represented not just a financial catastrophe, but a significant blow to America's air superiority capabilities. More importantly to those monitoring the situation, the potential loss of Captain Elena Vasquez would end the career of one of their most promising test pilots and eliminate a role model whose success had opened doors for other female aviators. General Patricia Morrison had been in continuous contact with the operation from her command center at Nellis. As the highest-ranking female officer in the immediate chain of command, she felt a particular responsibility for Elena's welfare. Morrison had broken barriers herself during her career, and she recognized Elena as a kindred spirit, someone whose achievements would be measured not just in personal success, but in their impact on future generations of female pilots. Status update from Ghostwriter Control, came the voice of Morrison's aide through her headset. Captain Vasquez is showing remarkable skill under extremely difficult circumstances. She's maintaining approach parameters despite multiple system failures. Morrison nodded, but her expression remained tense. She had been following Elena's career since her assignment to the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, and she knew the younger pilot's history of overcoming obstacles that would have ended other careers. But the situation was different, a test of skills that went beyond training and entered the realm of pure aviator instinct. The political implications of the emergency were also becoming apparent as news of the situation reached Washington. The Air Force had invested heavily in promoting diversity within its pilot community, using officers like Elena as examples of the service's commitment to equal opportunity. A failure here would not only be tragic in human terms, but would likely be seized upon by critics who had questioned whether physical standards had been appropriately maintained in the pursuit of diversity goals. Back in the cockpit, Elena was largely unaware of the growing audience for her emergency. Her focus had narrowed to the immediate challenges of managing a complex aircraft with degraded systems while executing a landing approach unlike anything in her training. The F-22 was responding to her control inputs, but she could feel the flight control systems fighting her decisions with increasing resistance. At 3,000 feet, she deployed her landing gear and flaps, feeling the aircraft shudder as additional surfaces extended into the airstream. The mechanical sounds of the landing gear extending were reassuring. At least some systems were still functioning normally. But the increased drag and altered aerodynamics put additional stress on already compromised flight controls. Ghost Rider Control. Falcon 7 has landing gear deployed and is on final approach, requesting confirmation of runway clear. Roger, Falcon 7. Highway is clear of civilian traffic for approximately 5 miles. Emergency services are standing by 2 miles from your touchdown point. Elena could now see Highway 95, clearly below her, a ribbon of asphalt that looked impossibly narrow compared to the runways she was accustomed to using. The road was straight and appeared to be in good condition, but it was significantly narrower than even the shortest runway she had ever landed on. There would be no margin for lateral error during the landing roll. The desert landscape scrolling beneath her aircraft told the story of the American West in miniature vast expanses of seemingly empty land marked by the occasional ranch house or mining operation. But Elena knew the emptiness was deceptive. This region was home to military installations, nuclear test sites, and populations that preferred isolation from more populated areas. A mishap here could have consequences extending far beyond her immediate circumstances. As she descended through 2,000 feet, Elena noticed something that hadn't been mentioned in the emergency communications: power lines running parallel to the highway. They were positioned far enough from the road to avoid immediate collision risks, but close enough to create additional psychological pressure during an approach that was already testing every skill she had developed as a pilot. The wind conditions were becoming a factor as well. The storm system that had been building throughout the morning was beginning to generate turbulence that buffeted her aircraft unpredictably. Elena found herself making constant corrections to maintain her approach path, fighting both mechanical failures and atmospheric conditions that were deteriorating by the minute. Elena's radio crackled with a new voice, calm, professional, and somehow familiar. "Falcon 7, this is Colonel Hayes. I'm monitoring your approach from Nellis Tower." Despite the circumstances, Elena felt a surge of emotion at hearing her former instructor's voice. Hayes had been instrumental in developing her skills as a pilot, and his presence on the radio provided a connection to all the training and preparation that had brought her to this moment. "Colonel Hayes, good to hear your voice, sir. I'm showing stable approach parameters despite system malfunctions. Planning touchdown in approximately 90 seconds. Copy that, Elena. You've got this. Remember everything we practiced about energy management and aircraft control. The fundamentals still apply, regardless of the runway." Elena smiled grimly at the understatement. Calling Highway 95 a runway was generous, but Hayes was right about the fundamentals. The physics of flight didn't change just because she was landing somewhere unconventional. At 1,500 feet, Elena encountered the most severe turbulence of the approach. The aircraft bucked and rolled as conflicting wind currents associated with the approaching storm system caught her wings. For a terrifying moment, she felt the Raptor trying to roll inverted as a particularly violent gust hit from the left side. Only years of training and instinctive control inputs prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of control. Ghost Rider. Control. Experiencing severe turbulence. Continuing approach, but conditions are deteriorating rapidly. Copy, Falcon 7. Weather radar shows the storm system intensifying. You're cleared for immediate landing. Any runway, your discretion. The irony of being cleared for any runway while approaching a highway wasn't lost on Elena, but she didn't have time to appreciate the humor. She was now committed to the landing, too low and too close to execute a go-around safely, even if her aircraft systems had been functioning normally. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Elena's former instructor from the academy, who was now serving as a flight safety officer at Air Education and Training Command, had been patched into the communication network at the request of General Morrison. Walsh had followed Elena's career with particular interest, having been one of the first people to recognize her exceptional potential as a pilot. From her office at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, Walsh was monitoring the emergency with growing admiration for her former students' handling of an impossible situation. She had reviewed Elena's training records earlier that morning after being briefed on the situation, looking for insights that might help inform the emergency response. General Morrison, this is Dr. Walsh. Based on Captain Vasquez's training, history and psychological profile, I believe she has the best possible chance of executing this landing successfully. Her spatial awareness scores were consistently in the top 1% of her peer group, and her performance under stress has always exceeded expectations. Morrison's response was tight with concern. I appreciate the assessment, Dr. Walsh. Right. Now we're all hoping that training and natural ability will be enough to overcome the mechanical challenges she's facing. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Elena's family was receiving fragmented reports about their daughter's situation from news broadcasts that were carrying unconfirmed information about an Air Force emergency in Nevada. Elena's mother, Carmen Vasquez, sat in her small living room, clutching her rosary, while watching television reports that showed military helicopters and emergency vehicles but provided few concrete details about what was happening. Elena's father, Roberto, had been called home from his shift at the packaging plant when a supervisor had seen news reports mentioning his daughter's name. He stood behind the couch, his work-roughened hands resting on his wife's shoulders, trying to make sense of technical terminology and military procedures that were completely outside his experience. They're saying she's going to land on a highway, Carmen said in Spanish, her voice barely above a whisper. How does someone land a plane on a highway? Roberto squeezed his wife's shoulders gently. He didn't understand the specifics of what their daughter was attempting, but he knew Elena well enough to trust her judgment. She had never failed at anything she had truly committed to achieving, from high school physics competitions to military flight training. If she believed this landing was possible, he would believe it too. Maria Vasquez was in her dormitory room at UCLA when she received a call from her parents about Elena's emergency. As an aerospace engineering student, she understood the technical challenges her sister was facing better than anyone else in the family. She immediately began calculating approach speeds, landing distances, and deceleration rates in her head, trying to determine whether what Elena was attempting was theoretically possible. The mathematics were sobering. Landing an F-22 on a standard runway required significant distance for deceleration, even under ideal conditions. Highway 95, while straight and relatively smooth, was substantially narrower than any runway the aircraft had been designed to use. The margin for error was essentially zero. Any deviation from a perfect approach and landing would likely result in catastrophe. Maria also knew her sister's capabilities better than most people. She had watched Elena solve seemingly impossible problems throughout her academic and military career, always finding ways to exceed expectations despite facing obstacles that would have stopped other people. If anyone could successfully execute an emergency highway landing, it would be Elena. At 1,000 feet above Highway 95, Elena began the final phase of her approach. The road was clearly visible below, marked by the emergency vehicles that had been positioned as visual references for her landing zone. She could see that the State Patrol had done an excellent job clearing civilian traffic. The highway appeared completely empty for miles in both directions. The aircraft was responding to her control inputs, but she could feel the flight control systems becoming increasingly sluggish. Whatever had caused the initial malfunctions was continuing to degrade, making every adjustment more difficult and less precise. Elena found herself anticipating the aircraft's responses and making larger control inputs to achieve the same results. Falcon 7, you're looking good on approach. Recommend you prepare for touchdown in approximately 30 seconds. Elena's hands moved across the cockpit controls, ensuring that all systems were configured for landing. The heads-up display was flickering intermittently, forcing her to rely more heavily on traditional flight instruments. The backup systems were holding, but barely. She could see warning lights illuminating across the instrument panel as secondary systems began failing in cascade fashion. The psychological pressure of the situation was enormous, but Elena had learned to compartmentalize stress during years of high-performance flight operations. She focused on the immediate tasks of controlling her aircraft and executing the approach, pushing aside thoughts about the potential consequences of failure. There would be time later to consider the broader implications of what she was attempting. As the desert floor rushed up to meet her, Elena caught sight of something that made her heart skip: a small group of people standing near the emergency vehicles, watching her approach. Despite all efforts to clear the area, there were witnesses to what might become either a triumph or a tragedy. The responsibility of performing under observation added another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming situation. Elena's training had included extensive practice in managing multiple simultaneous emergencies, but nothing had prepared her for the specific combination of challenges she now faced. The mechanical failures, adverse weather conditions, improvised landing site, and public attention created a perfect storm of stress factors that would have overwhelmed most pilots. But Elena wasn't most pilots. She was the product of years of intensive training, careful selection, and personal determination to succeed in an environment where failure wasn't just personal disappointment, but could result in loss of life and millions of dollars in damaged equipment. Every simulation, every training flight, every challenge she had overcome in her career had been preparation for moments like this. At 500 feet, Elena made her final configuration changes, reducing power slightly while maintaining approach speed. The F-22 was now committed to landing. There was no possibility of executing a go-around even if conditions deteriorated further. She was going to touch down on Highway 95 in the next 60 seconds. One way or another, the radio filled with voices from multiple agencies, all offering support and encouragement, but Elena barely heard them. Her focus had narrowed to the essential elements of aircraft control: airspeed, altitude, alignment with the highway centerline, and the subtle feedback from flight controls that told her how the aircraft was responding to her inputs. Her canopy, she could see individual details of the highway surface-painted lane markers, slight variations in pavement color, even some small debris that had been missed during the hurried clearing operation. The road looked impossibly narrow from her current perspective, but she maintained her approach path with the precision that had made her one of the Air Force's most skilled test pilots. Elena thought briefly of all the people who had doubted her capabilities over the years. The instructors who had questioned whether someone her size could handle the physical demands of flying fighters. the selection boards who had worried about ergonomic compatibility issues, the colleagues who had suggested that certain assignments might be better suited to more traditional candidates. Now, as she guided $30 million of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft toward a landing on a public highway, all those doubts seemed irrelevant. The aircraft didn't care about her height or her gender or anyone's preconceptions about what fighter pilots should look like. It only cared about her skill, her judgment, and her ability to make the right decisions under pressure. At 300 feet, Elena encountered a final challenge as crosswinds associated with the storm system tried to push her aircraft off the approach path. She made rapid corrections with rudder and aileron inputs, fighting to maintain alignment with the highway centerline while managing the degraded flight control responses. The desert landscape was now rushing past her canopy at tremendous speed. A blur of sand and scrub brush punctuated by the geometric precision of the highway stretching ahead. Emergency vehicles were positioned along the roadside, their flashing lights creating a surreal backdrop for what was about to become either the most remarkable landing in aviation history or one of its most spectacular failures. Elena keyed her radio one final time before touchdown. Ghost Rider Control, Falcon 7 on final approach. See you on the other side. The words carried confidence she didn't entirely feel, but they reflected the fundamental optimism that had sustained her throughout. A career of overcoming obstacles. Whatever happened in the next few seconds, she had given everything she had to give. The rest was up to physics, training, and whatever combination of skill and luck determined the outcome of high-stakes aviation emergencies. The F-22 Raptor touched down on Highway 95 at exactly 11:47 hours Mountain Time, its main landing gear making contact with asphalt in what would later be described by aviation experts as one of the most precisely executed emergency landings in military history. Elena felt the aircraft settle onto the highway surface with surprising gentleness, the advanced landing gear absorbing the impact as efficiently as it would have on a conventional runway. But the landing was only the beginning of her challenge. Highway 95, while straight and relatively smooth, was significantly narrower than any runway Elena had ever used, leaving minimal margin for error during the deceleration phase. The F-22's wheel brakes and drag chute would need to bring 37,000 pounds of aircraft to a complete stop in a distance that pushed the very limits of the aircraft's design capabilities. Elena deployed the drag chute immediately upon touchdown, feeling the reassuring tug as the parachute deployed behind her aircraft. The additional drag was substantial, but she could tell that aerodynamic braking alone wouldn't be sufficient to stop within the available distance. She would need to use wheel brakes aggressively while maintaining directional control on a surface that hadn't been designed for fighter aircraft operations. The Strider control, Falcon 7 is down safely and decelerating normally. Drag chute deployed, wheel brakes applied. The relief in Elena's voice was evident, but she remained focused on the critical task of bringing her aircraft to a controlled stop. Through her canopy, she could see emergency vehicles pacing her along the highway shoulders, their crews ready to respond immediately if something went wrong during the landing roll. In the control tower at Nellis, Colonel Hayes watched the radar track that represented Elena's aircraft slow from landing speed to taxi speed over the course of nearly 2 miles. The telemetry data streaming back from her aircraft showed all systems functioning normally during the deceleration phase, a remarkable outcome given the extensive malfunctions that had forced the emergency landing. "Outstanding job, Elena," Hayes transmitted, his voice carrying decades of professional admiration. That was textbook emergency procedures under circumstances that aren't covered in any textbook. The compliment meant more to Elena than Hayes could know. Throughout her career, she had worked to earn the respect of instructors and colleagues who had initially questioned her capabilities. Hearing praise from someone who had shaped her development as a pilot validated not just her performance during the emergency, but her entire Approach to military aviation. As the F-22 rolled to a complete stop on Highway 95, Elena began the process of shutting down aircraft systems and preparing for post-flight procedures. But even as she worked through familiar checklists, she was aware that what had just occurred would have consequences extending far beyond the immediate emergency. She had successfully landed a stealth fighter on a public highway, something that had never been done before, and would likely become a case study in aviation training programs for decades to come. The emergency response was immediate and coordinated. Fire suppression teams approached the aircraft cautiously, monitoring for fuel leaks or other hazards while Elena completed her shutdown procedures. Medical personnel stood ready to evaluate her condition, though she felt fine apart from the elevated heart rate and adrenaline surge that were natural responses to high-stress situations. Dr. Amanda Richardson, a flight surgeon from Nellis who had been dispatched to the landing site, was the first person to speak with Elena after she opened her canopy. Richardson climbed up on the aircraft's boarding ladder and began a rapid assessment of the pilot's condition, checking for signs of injury or physiological stress that might require immediate treatment. "How are you feeling, Captain Vasquez? Any pain or discomfort? Difficulty breathing or chest tightness?" Elena shook her head, though she was still breathing heavily from the exertion and stress of the emergency landing. "I feel fine, Doc. Maybe a little shaky from the adrenaline, but no injuries or problems." Richardson nodded and continued her examination, checking Elena's pulse and blood pressure while observing her general demeanor and cognitive function. The flight surgeon had extensive experience with aviation emergencies, and she was impressed by Elena's apparent composure following such an extraordinary event. "Your vital signs are elevated, but within normal ranges for someone who just executed a remarkable piece of flying," Richardson said. "We'll want to do a more comprehensive evaluation back at base, but preliminarily you appear to be in excellent condition." As word of the successful landing spread through military and aviation networks, the response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Elena's demonstration of piloting skill under extreme circumstances was being hailed as a textbook example of how training, preparation, and individual excellence could overcome seemingly impossible challenges. General Patricia Morrison arrived at the landing site within 30 minutes of touchdown, having flown directly from Nellis in a transport helicopter. As she approached Elena, who was now standing beside her aircraft while maintenance teams began preliminary inspections, Morrison's expression reflected both relief and professional admiration. "Captain Vasquez, on behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to express our appreciation for your outstanding performance today. What you accomplished here represents the very best of military aviation, the ability to think clearly under pressure and execute complex procedures under conditions that would challenge anyone." Elena stood at attention as General Morrison spoke, but the senior officer quickly gestured for her to relax. This wasn't a formal military ceremony, but rather a personal acknowledgement between aviators who understood the significance of what had just occurred. "Thank you, General. I was fortunate to have excellent training and an aircraft that responded well despite the system failures. The real credit belongs to all the people who prepared me for situations like this, even though nobody expected it would happen on a highway." Morrison smiled at Elena's characteristic deflection of praise toward others. Throughout her career, Elena had demonstrated a combination of confidence and humility that made her an effective leader and role model for other pilots. Her response to this emergency had reinforced Morrison's assessment of her character and potential for continued advancement. The media response to Elena's highway landing was instantaneous and global. Within hours of touchdown, video footage from news helicopters and ground-based cameras was being broadcast on aviation websites, social media platforms, and major news networks around the world. The image of an F-22 Raptor sitting on a Nevada highway surrounded by emergency vehicles and desert landscape, became an immediate icon of aviation achievement. Aviation Week in Space Technology, the industry's most respected publication, published a preliminary analysis of the landing within 6 hours of the event. The article, written by senior correspondent Bill Sweetman, described Elena's performance as a demonstration of piloting skill that ranks among the most impressive emergency landings in the history of military aviation. The article continued. Captain Vasquez faced a combination of mechanical failures, adverse weather conditions, and an improvised landing site that would have challenged even the most experienced test pilots. Her successful execution of this emergency landing demonstrates not only individual excellence, but the effectiveness of Air Force training programs in preparing pilots for situations that extend far beyond normal operational parameters. Social media responses were equally enthusiastic, with aviation enthusiasts and military supporters sharing video, clips and photographs of the landing across multiple platforms. The hashtag Highway Raptor began trending within hours, accompanied by discussions about Elena's background, the technical challenges she had overcome, and the broader implications for military aviation. But perhaps the most significant response came from Elena's family in Los Angeles, who had watched television coverage of the emergency with growing anxiety until the successful landing was confirmed. Carmen Vasquez, Elena's mother, broke down in tears of relief when she saw footage of her daughter standing safely beside her aircraft, gesturing and speaking with military personnel. Roberto Vasquez, Elena's father, called his daughter's cell phone as soon as news reports confirmed that she was uninjured. Their conversation was brief but emotional, conducted in a mixture of Spanish and English that reflected the bilingual household where Elena had grown up. "Mia, we saw on the television what happened. Your mother and we were so scared, but we knew you would find a way. You always find a way." Elena's voice was thick with emotion as she responded, "I'm okay, Papa. Everything is fine. I just did what they trained me to do." "What they trained you to do was land on a highway?" Roberto asked, injecting a note of humor into the conversation despite his obvious relief. Elena laughed, feeling some of the tension of the past few hours beginning to dissipate. "Not exactly, but close enough. I'll call you again tonight when I get back to base and have more time to talk." Maria Vasquez, Elena's sister, had been following news coverage from her dormitory room at UCLA, where she had been frantically texting aerospace, engineering classmates and professors for technical insights into what her sister was attempting. When confirmation of the successful landing reached her, Maria immediately called her parents and then began composing a Facebook post that would be shared hundreds of times within the first hour. "My sister Elena just landed an F-22 fighter jet on a highway in Nevada after multiple system failures made it impossible to reach a normal airport. She's been breaking barriers and exceeding expectations her entire life, but this might be her most amazing achievement yet. Proud doesn't begin to describe how I feel right now." The post was accompanied by photographs from Elena's graduation from the Air Force Academy, her promotion ceremonies, and family gatherings where she appeared in uniform alongside relatives, who clearly regarded her with enormous pride and admiration. Meanwhile, the technical investigation into the aircraft malfunction that had necessitated the emergency landing was beginning immediately. Air Force accident investigation teams were dispatched to examine Elena's aircraft and begin the process of determining what had caused the cascade of system failures that had put both pilot and aircraft at risk. Master Sergeant Robert Martinez, the senior maintenance supervisor for the 422nd Test and Evaluation Squadron, arrived at the highway landing site within an hour of touchdown. Martinez had 30 years of experience maintaining fighter aircraft, and he had never seen anything quite like what Elena had accomplished. "Captain Vasquez, I've been working on fighters since before you were born, and I've never seen a pilot handle a situation like this. Martinez told Elena as they stood beside the F-22. "The fact that you brought this aircraft down in one piece, on a highway, with the system failures you were experiencing, that's going to be talked about in maintenance shops for the next 20 years. Elena appreciated the compliment, but she was already thinking ahead to the investigation process and the lessons that might be learned from the incident. Emergency landings, even successful ones, were opportunities to examine procedures, training, and equipment designed to prevent similar situations in the future. That the preliminary examination of Elena's aircraft revealed evidence of a cascading electrical failure that had affected multiple flight control systems simultaneously. The root cause wasn't immediately apparent, but investigators suspected that a manufacturing defect or component failure had triggered the broader system malfunctions. Dr. Sarah Chen, Elena's former colleague and mentor, called her cell phone that evening to offer congratulations and support. Chen had followed news coverage of the emergency throughout the day, and she wanted to ensure that Elena was receiving the recognition she deserved for her performance under pressure. "Elena, I've been watching the news coverage all day, and I wanted you to know how proud I am of what you accomplished. But more than that, I hope you realize what this means for everyone who comes after you. You've shown that excellence has nothing to do with fitting traditional expectations." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering the broader implications of Chen's words. Throughout her career, she had been aware that her success or failure would be scrutinized, not just as individual achievement, but as evidence for or against the capabilities of female pilots who didn't fit conventional stereotypes. "I hope you're right, Sarah. I've always tried to focus on doing my job well, but I know there are people watching who see more than just individual performance. If this helps other people get opportunities they deserve, then I'm glad it happened the way it did." The conversation with Chen reminded Elena of all the challenges she had overcome to reach this point in her career. The doubts expressed by instructors, the subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that certain assignments might not be appropriate for someone of her physical characteristics, the rejections from programs like NASA's astronaut corps that seemed to reflect persistent biases, despite official policies of equal opportunity. But the successful highway landing had demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be dismissed or rationalized away. Elena had proven, under the most demanding circumstances possible, that excellence in aviation depended on skills and judgment that had nothing to do with physical characteristics that had been used to limit opportunities for qualified pilots. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Elena stood beside Highway 95, watching recovery teams prepare her aircraft for transport back to Nellis Air Force Base. The F-22 would undergo extensive inspection and repair before returning to service, but preliminary assessments suggested that the aircraft had suffered minimal damage. Despite the unconventional landing, Elena's own immediate future was less certain. The success of the emergency landing would likely lead to new opportunities and assignments, but it might also bring unwanted attention and pressure to serve as a spokesperson for causes she preferred to support through professional achievement, rather than public advocacy. For now, though, she was content to reflect on a day that had begun with routine flight testing and ended with aviation history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions, but tonight she was simply a pilot who had done her job well under extraordinary circumstances. 3 months after the highway landing, Captain Elena Vasquez found herself standing in the Pentagon briefing room, facing a panel of senior Air Force leadership and congressional representatives who had convened to examine the incident and its implications for military aviation, training and emergency procedures. The formal investigation into the F-22 system failures had concluded, revealing a manufacturing defect in a critical electrical component that could potentially affect other aircraft in the fleet. Elena's testimony was precise and technical, walking the panel through each decision she had made during the emergency while explaining the reasoning behind her choice to attempt a highway landing rather than ejecting from the aircraft. Her presentation was supported by telemetry data, expert analysis, and computer simulations that confirmed her assessment of the situation had been accurate and her execution nearly flawless. Captain Vasquez asked Congressman Robert Mills, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee's Subcommittee on Tactical Air and Land Forces, "In your professional opinion, how much of your successful emergency landing can be attributed to your training versus individual judgment and experience?" Elena considered the question carefully before responding. "Congressman, I believe the foundation was definitely my training, both the formal emergency procedures we practice regularly and the general aviation skills developed through years of flight experience. But the specific challenges of landing on a highway required adapting standard procedures to circumstances that aren't covered in any manual. That required judgment based on understanding the aircraft and the environment." The panel seemed satisfied with her response, but Elena sensed that the real purpose of the hearing extended beyond the technical aspects of the emergency. Her successful highway landing had generated significant media attention and public interest in military aviation, creating opportunities for the Air Force to highlight its pilot training programs and recruit new talent. General Morrison, who had been following Elena's post-incident career developments closely, spoke with her privately after the formal proceedings. They walked through the Pentagon's corridors, past displays of military aviation history that now seemed more personally relevant to Elena than they had before her own brush with becoming part of that history. "Elena, I want to discuss some opportunities that have emerged as a result of your performance during the emergency. NASA has expressed renewed interest in your astronaut application. The test pilot school is offering an accelerated admission track, and we've had inquiries from several aerospace companies about consulting arrangements." Elena listened carefully, but her response was characteristically thoughtful rather than immediately enthusiastic. "General, I appreciate all of these opportunities, but I want to make sure I'm making decisions for the right reasons. I don't want to be selected for anything just because of media attention or public relations value." Morrison smiled at Elena's directness. "I understand your concerns, and they reflect the same judgment that served you well during the emergency. But I want you to consider that your demonstrated capabilities under pressure are exactly what these organizations are looking for. The highway landing didn't create your qualifications, it revealed them." The NASA opportunity was particularly intriguing to Elena. Dr. James Patterson, Director of Astronaut Candidate Selection, had called her personally to discuss the possibility of reapplying for the astronaut corps. The conversation had been frank about the reasons for her previous rejections and the factors that had changed following her emergency landing demonstration. "Captain Vasquez, I want to be direct about what happened with your previous applications," Patterson had told her during their phone conversation. "There were concerns about physical requirements for long-duration spaceflight, but those concerns were based on outdated assumptions about the relationship between body size and mission capability." Elena had appreciated Patterson's honesty, but she remained skeptical about NASA's sudden change in perspective. "Dr. Patterson, I respect your candor, but I need to understand whether this renewed interest is based on genuine reassessment of my qualifications or on public relations considerations following recent events." Patterson's response had been equally direct. "Your emergency landing demonstrated problem-solving abilities and performance under pressure that are exactly what we need for complex space missions. The publicity certainly doesn't hurt, but our primary interest is in your capabilities as a pilot and potential mission specialist." Elena had requested time to consider the NASA opportunity, but she was also exploring other options that might allow her to contribute to aerospace advancement while remaining in her current role. The test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base offered the possibility of participating in cutting-edge aircraft development programs, working with experimental systems that push the boundaries of flight performance. Colonel David Thompson, commandant of the test pilot school, had visited Elena at Nellis specifically to discuss the accelerated admission program that had been created in response to her demonstrated capabilities. Thompson was a legendary test pilot himself, with a career that included first flights on several classified aircraft programs. "Elena, what you accomplished on Highway 95 represents the kind of thinking and skill that we try to develop in our graduates," Thompson had told her. "You demonstrated an ability to analyze a complex situation, develop an unconventional solution, and execute it under pressure. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in experimental test pilots." The offer from the test pilot school was appealing because it would allow Elena to continue flying while contributing to the development of future aircraft systems. Test pilots played crucial roles in evaluating new technologies and procedures, providing feedback that influenced the design of aircraft that might not enter service for decades. But Elena was also being courted by private aerospace companies that were developing commercial spaceflight systems and advanced aviation technologies. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and several smaller firms had contacted her about consulting arrangements that would allow her to transition to civilian aviation while applying her military experience to commercial aircraft development. The most intriguing private sector opportunity came from Horizon Aerospace, a startup company developing next-generation training systems for military and civilian pilots. The company's founder, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, was a former Air Force pilot who had transitioned to aerospace engineering and entrepreneurship. Elena were developing simulation and training systems that could revolutionize how pilots prepare for emergency situations, Martinez had explained during their meeting at a Las Vegas conference center. "Your experience with the highway landing could provide invaluable insights into how pilots respond to unprecedented challenges and how we can better prepare them for similar situations." Elena was interested in Martinez's work because it addressed questions that had emerged from her own emergency experience. Current training programs were excellent for known emergency procedures, but they couldn't fully prepare pilots for situations that fell outside established parameters. Developing better training methods could potentially save lives and aircraft in future emergencies. Meanwhile, Elena's family had been dealing with their own adjustments to her sudden prominence in military and aviation circles. The highway landing had generated extensive media coverage, making Elena's name and face recognizable to people who had never heard of her before the emergency. The attention was both gratifying and occasionally overwhelming for a family that had always valued privacy and quiet achievement. Carmen Vasquez, Elena's mother, had been approached by reporters and documentary filmmakers interested in telling Elena's story from a family perspective. While she was proud of her daughter's accomplishments, Carmen was also protective of the family's privacy and concerned about exploitation of their immigrant background for dramatic effect. "They want to make it about being poor and struggling," Carmen told Elena during one of their phone conversations. "But that's not the whole story. Yes, we worked hard and sacrificed, but we also believed in education and opportunity. You succeeded because you're smart and determined, not just because we're immigrants." Elena understood her mother's concerns and had been careful about which media requests to accept. She wanted to share her story in ways that might inspire other young people, particularly women and minorities interested in aviation careers. But she didn't want to be reduced to a simplistic narrative of overcoming obstacles through determination. Alone, Roberto Vasquez, Elena's father, had been more comfortable with the media attention, particularly interviews that focused on Elena's technical accomplishments rather than just her personal background. He had appeared on several Spanish-language television programs to discuss his daughter's career, always emphasizing her education and training rather than the dramatic circumstances of the highway landing. "People want to hear about the emergency because it was exciting," Roberto had told a Univision reporter. "But Elena didn't become a great pilot because of one day. She became a great pilot because she studied and practiced and never gave up on her dreams. Maria Vasquez, Elena's sister, had become something of a celebrity herself on the UCLA campus following Elena's highway landing. As an aerospace engineering student, Maria was able to provide technical explanations of her sister's accomplishment that helped classmates and professors understand the complexity of what had been achieved. Maria had also been invited to speak at several engineering conferences about the importance of diversity in aerospace careers. Her presentations focused on the technical challenges Elena had overcome and the broader implications for aircraft design and emergency procedures. My sister proved that excellence in aviation has nothing to do with fitting traditional expectations, Maria told an audience at the Society of Women Engineers National Conference. She succeeded because she understood the physics of flight and could apply that knowledge under pressure. Those capabilities don't depend on height or gender or any other characteristic that's been used to limit opportunities in the past. The educational impact of Elena's story was perhaps its most lasting legacy. Flight schools and aerospace engineering programs across the country were using her highway landing as a case study in emergency procedures, decision-making under pressure, and the importance of thorough training in preparing for unexpected situations. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Elena's former instructor from the Air Force Academy, had developed a curriculum module based on the highway landing that was being used at military flight training programs. The module examined not just the technical aspects of Elena's performance, but also the psychological and physiological factors that influence decision-making during high-stress emergencies. Elena's experience provides insights into how training can prepare pilots for situations that go beyond standard emergency procedures. Walsh explained to a conference of flight instructors. Her success demonstrates the importance of developing judgment and adaptability alongside technical skills. The Federal Aviation Administration had also taken notice of Elena's emergency landing, incorporating lessons learned from the incident into their own training materials for civilian pilots. While highway landings remained extremely rare and dangerous, the FAA recognized that Elena's experience provided valuable insights into emergency decision-making and unconventional landing procedures. Elena herself had been invited to speak at numerous aviation conferences and training seminars, sharing her insights with both military and civilian audiences. These presentations allowed her to contribute to the broader aviation community while maintaining her active duty status and continuing her work as a test pilot. The aircraft manufacturers were also learning from Elena's experience. Lockheed Martin, builder of the F-22 Raptor, had conducted extensive analysis of the system failures that had precipitated the emergency, leading to design improvements that would be incorporated into future aircraft and retrofit programs for existing fleets. Boeing, manufacturer of many civilian aircraft, had consulted with Elena about emergency procedures and pilot training programs. Her insights into decision-making under pressure were being incorporated into training materials for airline pilots who might face similar challenges in choosing between conventional and unconventional emergency responses. 6 months after the coup-d'etat highway landing, Elena made her decision about future career directions. She accepted the offer from the test pilot school at Edwards, but with a unique arrangement that would allow her to split her time between experimental flight testing and developing new training programs based on her emergency experience. Position would let her continue flying while contributing to advances in both aircraft technology and pilot training methods. It represented a perfect synthesis of her interests in pushing the boundaries of flight performance while helping other pilots develop the skills needed to handle emergency situations. Elena's announcement of her new assignment was met with enthusiasm from across the aerospace community. The test pilot school gained an instructor with unique experience and demonstrated capabilities, while the broader aviation community would benefit from her insights into emergency procedures and training methods. General Morrison personally congratulated Elena on her new assignment during a ceremony at Nellis Air Force Base. The event was attended by family members, colleagues, and media representatives who had followed Elena's career since the highway landing. Captain Vasquez represents the very best of military aviation, Morrison told the assembled audience. Her performance during the emergency demonstrated not just individual excellence but the effectiveness of our training programs in preparing pilots for challenges that extend far beyond normal operational parameters. Her new assignment will allow her to share those capabilities with the next generation of test pilots. Elena's response to the recognition was characteristically humble and forward-looking. I'm grateful for the opportunities I've had and excited about contributing to the development of future aircraft and training systems. The highway landing was just one day, but the lessons we can learn from it might help other pilots for years to come. As Elena prepared for her transition to Edwards Air Force Base and the test pilot school, she reflected on the path that had brought her from a small apartment in East Los Angeles to the forefront of military aviation. The journey had included challenges and obstacles that might have stopped other people, but it had also included opportunities and support from mentors who had recognized her potential. The highway landing had been a defining moment, but Elena understood that it represented the culmination of years of preparation rather than a single dramatic event. Her success had been built on education, training, determination, and the support of family and colleagues who had believed in her capabilities even when others expressed doubts. Now, as she looked toward the future, Elena saw opportunities to contribute to aerospace advancement while inspiring others who might face similar challenges in pursuing their own dreams. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared to be part of a larger story about perseverance, excellence, and the importance of keeping opportunities open for everyone with the talent and determination to succeed. 2 years later, auditorium at Edwards Air Force Base was packed beyond capacity as Captain Elena Vasquez, now Major Vasquez, stood at the podium to address the graduating class of the test pilot school. Behind her, a large screen displayed photographs from her highway landing, alongside images of the experimental aircraft she had tested. Since joining the school as both student and instructor, the audience included not just the graduating test pilots and their families, but representatives from NASA, major aerospace companies, and international military delegations who had come to Edwards specifically to hear Elena speak. Her reputation had grown far beyond the single emergency that had first brought her to public attention, evolving into recognition as one of the most innovative test pilots of her generation. When I landed on Highway 95 2 years ago, Elena began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium sound system, I thought I was just solving an immediate problem, getting my aircraft and myself safely on the ground. I had no idea that day would lead to everything that has happened since. Elena's presentation focused not on the dramatic circumstances of the highway landing, but on the lessons learned from that experience and how they had influenced aircraft design, training methods, and emergency procedures. The test pilot school had incorporated her insights into their curriculum, creating new approaches to teaching unconventional problem-solving and decision-making under pressure. In the audience, Elena's parents sat in the front row, their faces reflecting pride and continuing amazement at their daughter's achievements. Carmen Vasquez wore a simple blue dress and held a program from the ceremony, while Roberto had dressed in his best suit for the occasion. Despite attending dozens of military ceremonies over the past 2 years, they still seemed slightly overwhelmed by the formal military environment. Maria Vasquez, now in her junior year at UCLA and interning at SpaceX, sat beside her parents taking notes on her sister's presentation. Maria's own career was flourishing, with her aerospace engineering professors regularly citing Elena's emergency landing as an example of how theoretical knowledge applied to real-world problem-solving. The sisters had grown even closer since the highway landing, bonding over their shared passion for aerospace technology and their experiences as women, pursuing careers in male-dominated fields. Elena's presentation included video footage from her recent test flights, including first flights on experimental aircraft that wouldn't be publicly acknowledged for years. Her work at Edwards had expanded beyond conventional flight testing to include evaluation of artificial intelligence systems, advanced materials, and propulsion technologies that might eventually power hypersonic aircraft and spacecraft. The most important lesson from my emergency landing, Elena continued, wasn't about flying techniques or aircraft systems. It was about the importance of preparing for situations you can't predict by developing judgment, adaptability, and the confidence and the confidence to make decisions when standard procedures don't apply. The philosophy Elena described had become central to her work at the test pilot school, where she was developing new training methods that emphasized creative problem-solving alongside technical proficiency. Her students learned not just how to follow established procedures, but how to develop their own solutions when facing unprecedented challenges. 5 years later, Dr. Elena Vasquez floated weightlessly in the cupola of the International Space Station, looking down at Earth through the largest windows ever installed on a spacecraft. The view was spectacular, the blue marble of their home planet suspended against the infinite black of space, with cloud formations swirling across continents, and oceans in patterns that seemed both random and purposeful. Elena's path to space had taken 5 years from the highway landing, including completion of the test pilot school, selection for NASA's astronaut corps, and 2 years of intensive training for long-duration spaceflight missions. The same qualities that had enabled her to land safely on a Nevada highway had proven equally valuable in preparing for the challenges of living and working in space. Her current mission was a 6-month rotation aboard the ISS, serving as flight engineer and conducting experiments in materials science, biology, and astrophysics. But Elena's most important contribution to the mission was her work developing emergency procedures for spacecraft operations, drawing on her experience with unconventional problem-solving to improve safety protocols for future space missions. Irony wasn't lost on her that she was now working in an environment where her physical size was actually an advantage. In the microgravity of space, smaller astronauts required less food, water, and oxygen, while being better able to navigate the cramped confines of spacecraft designed to minimize weight and volume. Elena's space mission had generated significant media attention, particularly among young women and minorities who saw her journey from rejected astronaut candidate to space station crew member as evidence that persistence and excellence could overcome institutional barriers. Schools across the country were following her mission, with students conducting their own versions of her experiments and learning about space science through her regular educational broadcasts. 10 years later, the conference room at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston was filled with senior space agency officials, aerospace industry representatives, and congressional staffers as Major General Elena Vasquez presented her proposal for humanity's return to the moon. Elena, now wearing the stars of a general officer, had spent the past decade building a career that encompassed test pilot excellence, spaceflight experience, and increasing responsibility for NASA's most ambitious programs. Her presentation outlined a comprehensive plan for establishing a permanent lunar base that would serve as a stepping stone for eventual missions to Mars and beyond. The proposal drew heavily on her experience with emergency procedures and unconventional problem-solving, anticipating challenges that might arise during long-duration missions far from Earth. The success of any lunar program will depend on our ability to handle unexpected situations with limited resources and no possibility of immediate rescue, Elena explained to the assembled audience. We need to train our crews not just for known procedures, but for the kind of creative problem-solving that space exploration will inevitably require. Elena's credibility in making such arguments was unquestioned. Her emergency landing on Highway 95 had become a case study taught at NASA, the military academies, and engineering schools around the world. Her subsequent career had demonstrated a consistent ability to excel in challenging environments while developing new approaches to complex problems. The lunar program Elena proposed was eventually approved by Congress and became the foundation for America's return to the moon in the muddy late 2030s. Her leadership of the program represented the culmination of a career that had begun with doubts about whether someone her size could handle the physical demands of military aviation. 15 years later, the retirement ceremony for Lieutenant General Elena Vasquez was held at the Air Force Academy, where her journey in military aviation had begun more than 3 decades earlier. The venue was symbolic, returning to the place where she had first encountered the skepticism and support that would shape her entire career. Elena's retirement rank of Lieutenant General made her one of the highest-ranking female officers in Air Force history, but her influence extended far beyond military hierarchy. She had become a transformational figure in aerospace, someone whose career had opened doors for others while advancing the boundaries of flight and space exploration. The ceremony was attended by family members, military colleagues, aerospace industry leaders, and dozens of young officers whose careers had been inspired by Elena's example. Maria Vasquez, now Dr. Maria Vasquez and a senior engineer at Boeing, served as the ceremony's keynote speaker, reflecting on her sister's impact on their family and the broader aerospace community. Elena taught us that excellence has nothing to do with meeting traditional expectations, Maria told the assembled audience. She succeeded because she understood that the laws of physics don't discriminate, and neither should the institutions that develop and deploy advanced technology. Elena's retirement from active duty marked the beginning of a new phase in her career, focused on education and mentorship. She accepted a position as a professor at the Air Force Academy, where she would teach courses on aerospace engineering, emergency procedures, and leadership under pressure. 20 years later, the Elena Vasquez Center for Aerospace Excellence at the Air Force Academy was dedicated on a crisp Colorado morning, with hundreds of cadets, faculty members, and distinguished visitors in attendance. The building housed advanced flight simulators, research laboratories, and classrooms designed to train the next generation of military aviators and space professionals. Elena, now in her early 50s but still vibrant and engaged, spoke at the dedication ceremony about the importance of preparing young people for challenges that couldn't be anticipated or easily categorized. The center represented her philosophy that excellence in aerospace required both technical proficiency and the ability to think creatively under pressure. The most important thing we can teach future aviators and astronauts, Elena told the dedication audience, is not how to follow procedures, but how to develop their own solutions when procedures don't exist. The next generation will face challenges we can't imagine, and they need to be prepared for the unexpected. The center's programs attracted students from around the world, becoming a leading institution for aerospace education and research. Elena's influence on the curriculum was evident in its emphasis on problem-solving, adaptability, and the integration of technical knowledge with practical experience. 25 years later, the documentary Highway to the Stars, the Elena Vasquez story, premiered simultaneously in theaters and streaming platforms around the world, telling the story of her journey from childhood dreams of flight to leadership roles in military aviation and space exploration. The film used archive footage, interviews, and dramatic recreations to trace her career, while examining the broader social and technological changes that had occurred during her lifetime. Elena, now serving as Director of Aerospace Education for NASA, participated in the documentary while maintaining her characteristic focus on lessons learned rather than personal drama. She used the platform to discuss current challenges in aerospace education and the importance of maintaining American leadership in space exploration. The documentary's most powerful sequence showed Elena returning to Highway 95 in Nevada, standing at the exact spot where she had landed her F-22 Raptor 25 years earlier. The highway looked the same, but the context had changed dramatically. Elena's emergency landing was now marked by a historical monument that drew thousands of visitors annually. "I never intended to make history that day," Elena reflected as she stood beside the monument. "I was just trying to solve an immediate problem with the tools and training I had available. But I learned that sometimes the most important moments in our lives are the ones we never planned for." 30 years later, the first crewed mission to Mars included Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Vasquez, Elena's daughter and a second-generation test pilot who had followed her mother's path through the Air Force Academy, Test Pilot School, and NASA's Astronaut Corps. Sarah's selection for the historic Mars mission represented both personal achievement and the continuation of a family legacy in aerospace exploration. Elena, now retired from government service but still active as a consultant and speaker, watched the Mars launch from the VIP viewing area at Kennedy Space Center. At 78 years old, she remained sharp and engaged, serving on advisory boards for aerospace companies and educational institutions. While continuing to mentor young pilots and engineers, the launch was broadcast globally, with special attention paid to the multi-generational aspect of the crew selection. Sarah Vasquez represented the culmination of changes that had begun with her mother's generation. Women and minorities were now routinely selected for the most challenging missions based purely on qualifications and capabilities. During the launch broadcast, Elena was interviewed about her daughter's mission and the evolution of aerospace careers since her own emergency landing 30 years earlier. Her responses reflected decades of experience and perspective, but also the same clarity of thought that had served her during the crisis over Nevada. "Sarah's generation doesn't face the same barriers that existed when I started flying," Elena observed. "But they face different challenges, longer missions, more complex technology, and destinations that require even greater independence and problem-solving ability. The fundamentals remain the same: thorough preparation, clear thinking under pressure, and the willingness to attempt solutions that others might consider impossible." Elena's influence on aerospace education and safety procedures had become woven into the fabric of military and civilian aviation. Emergency response protocols developed from her highway landing experience were now standard throughout the aviation industry, while training methods she had pioneered were used by flight schools and space agencies around the world. The monument on Highway 95 had grown into a small museum dedicated to aviation history and safety, attracting school groups and aviation enthusiasts who wanted to understand how one pilot's quick thinking had contributed to advances in emergency procedures and flight training. Elena visited occasionally, usually unannounced, to speak with visitors and answer questions about her experience. Present day, 35 years later, Dr. Elena Vasquez, now 83 years old and Professor Emeritus at the Air Force Academy, sat in her study reviewing the final manuscript of her autobiography. The book, titled Landing Outside the Lines: Lessons from an Unconventional Career, would be published next month to commemorate the 35th anniversary of her highway landing. The autobiography was more than a personal memoir. It was a reflection on the changes that had occurred in aerospace during her lifetime and a guide for future generations facing their own unexpected challenges. Elena had written the book not to celebrate her own achievements, but to share insights that might help others navigate careers in rapidly evolving technical fields. Her study was decorated with photographs and memorabilia from a career that had spanned multiple eras of aerospace development. Images of her with presidents, astronauts, and aerospace pioneers shared wall space with family photographs and letters from students whose careers had been influenced by her teaching and mentorship. Maria Vasquez, now retired from Boeing and serving as an aerospace consultant, visited her sister regularly to help with the book project and to maintain the close relationship that had sustained both women throughout their careers. Despite their different paths, Elena through military service and government agencies, Maria through industry and academia, they had remained each other's closest advisors and strongest supporters. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the landing had gone differently? Maria asked during one of their conversations in Elena's study. Elena considered the question carefully, as she had many times over the decades. I think about it sometimes, but not in a way that changes anything. That landing was just one day in a long career. What mattered more were all the days of preparation that made it possible, and all the days afterward when we used the lessons learned to help other people. The final chapter of Elena's autobiography focused not on her own achievements but on the young pilots and engineers who were now pushing boundaries she could never have imagined. The technology had advanced exponentially since her highway landing, but the human qualities that enabled success in aerospace, curiosity, persistence, clear thinking under pressure, and the willingness to attempt solutions others considered impossible remained constant. Elena's concluding words reflected the perspective of someone who had witnessed and contributed to transformational changes in aerospace while maintaining focus on the fundamental principles that enabled human flight. The airplane doesn't know how tall you are, and space doesn't care about your background or the obstacles others said you couldn't overcome. Physics is the ultimate equal opportunity employer. It responds only to competence, preparation, and the willingness to think clearly when everything depends on making the right decision. I landed on Highway 95 not because I was special, but because I had been prepared by excellent teachers, supported by dedicated colleagues, and trained to keep thinking when standard solutions weren't available. Those same resources are available to everyone who chooses to pursue them. The barriers that seemed insurmountable when I started flying have been replaced by different challenges for each new generation. But the solution remains the same: thorough preparation, clear thinking, and the confidence to attempt what others consider impossible. The highway landing was just one day. The real accomplishment was everything that came before and everything that came after, the daily work of pushing boundaries, developing capabilities, and opening doors for others to walk through. To everyone who dreams of flight, space, or any other destination that seems impossibly distant, prepare thoroughly, think clearly, and never let anyone convince you that excellence has anything to do with fitting their expectations. The sky belongs to those who earn it, one careful decision at a time. Elena closed the manuscript file on her computer and looked out the window of her study toward the mountains surrounding Colorado Springs. Somewhere above those peaks, young pilots were learning the fundamentals of flight in aircraft that would have seemed impossibly advanced when she first soloed decades ago. In a few years, some of them would travel to Mars, asteroids, and destinations that existed only in current planning documents. Each generation faced challenges their predecessors couldn't have imagined, but each also inherited tools and knowledge that made new achievements possible. Elena's highway landing had become part of that inheritance, reminder that excellence often required going beyond established procedures to find solutions that others considered impossible. As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, Elena reflected on a career that had taken her from a small apartment in Los Angeles to leadership roles in the most advanced aerospace programs on Earth. The journey had included obstacles and disappointments, but it had also provided opportunities to contribute to human understanding of flight and space while inspiring others to pursue their own dreams of exploration. The F-22 Raptor came to a complete stop on Highway 95, its engines winding down as emergency vehicles rushed toward the aircraft. Elena sat in her cockpit for a moment, hands still gripping the controls, hardly believing what she had just accomplished. Ghost Rider Control, Falcon 7 is safely on the ground. Aircraft secured, pilot uninjured, she transmitted. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The response crackled back immediately. Outstanding work. Falcon 7. That was the most incredible piece of flying any of us have ever witnessed. As Elena began shutting down her aircraft systems, she could see emergency personnel approaching cautiously, their faces reflecting the same amazement she felt. She had just landed a $30 million stealth fighter on a public highway, something that had never been done before and would be talked about in aviation circles for decades to come. Elena opened her canopy and took her first breath of desert air, looking out at the highway that had become her unlikely runway. What had started as a routine test flight had become a defining moment, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary achievements come from simply doing your job when everything goes wrong. Highway 95 stretched endlessly in both directions, but for Elena Vasquez, it had become the landing strip that would change her life forever.